in the context of previous testimony you just provided in this committee, you talked about feeling intimidated, and or maybe not you feeling intimidated, but where that line could be crossed. But yet, as was mentioned earlier, when you are sent a messenger from the Prime Minister's office that talks about a mood, that talks about a collision course, like, what did you mean by that?
So first of all, I'm trying my best to respond to the questions and reconstruct a sequence of events. I apologize to the members if I've got events of 5 years out of sequence, and whether my testimony, which happened twice, was before or after other events. I don't have the chronology clear in my head. So if I mixed it up, I apologize to the committee. You're talking, I presume, about my first appearance at the Justice Committee? Or are you talking about the...
I'm talking about the recording that came out.
Yeah.
And I would say that it's a lot easier for you to operate in this committee if you just answer the questions. Then you don't have to think about what you did, and you don't have to think about timelines. Just answer.
Well, actually, the timelines matter to the answers. So yes, I do want to know the sequence of events.
December 19th, 2018.
Right. And that conversation was available to the commissioner. So I'm not sure what your question is again still. I'm trying to answer it. What is your question?
You said the Prime Minister was in kind of a mood and that the Attorney General was in a collision course. I'm going to put to you, sir, that sounds like a threat. That sounds like when you say that you arrived from meeting him a few hours ago and you came to her with that message, that sounds like a threat.
Certainly was not intended as a threat, and it's not the interpretation of the commissioner.
Those are my questions.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Mr. Cooper, for 5 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Wernick. 2 days before Jody Wilson-Raybould testified before the Justice Committee, you drafted Order in Council 2019-0105 that partially waived cabinet confidentiality, correct?
No. I had left all of the issues about confidences and divulgation to the deputy clerk, so she would have supervised the drafting of it. It's possible I signed it off as the clerk. No, I don't remember.
You had no involvement whatsoever. You had no conversations with the Prime Minister, and the deputy clerk had no conversations with the Prime Minister?
As soon as I was invited to the Justice Committee, I stepped back and recused myself from all of the issues around document production.
You recused yourself entirely. Okay. So you wouldn't be able to comment, for example, on why the order in council was drafted in a way that prevented Jody Wilson-Raybould from providing her full version of events?
I did not participate in the drafting of it. I'm sure we would have been trying to strike some sort of balance between the confidentiality of those cabinet meetings and Ms. Wilson and the specifics that Ms. Wilson-Raybould was going to be asked to testify about.
Jody Wilson,
I did not participate.
Jody Wilson.
I didn't participate in the drafting of that order.
So is it accurate to say that you recused yourself entirely from the drafting of that order in council and any discussions that may have taken place about expanding the scope of that?
Point of order, Chair. I understood that we were meeting today to talk about an RCMP investigation. That was
to the very heart of that issue.
Hang on, Mr.
So I've got the floor, Mr. Cooper. But just so rehashing something that happened 5 years ago that has been subject to numerous meetings of a whole bunch of different committees in Parliament. We're talking about the RCMP, and none of these questions have to do with an RCMP investigation, which my understanding, Mr. Chair, you brought that he was here to talk about what the motion was with regard to. Maybe we could just stick to that.
You were asking about my Twitter in the last round.
Michael, just hang on a second. Thank you for that, Ms. Damoff. I appreciate your words. Mr. Cooper, you have the floor, and you can continue on this. And I did stop your clock, and I expect that you're going to come back.
I expect Mr. Wernick to answer the question that I asked.
Go ahead, please.
Sorry, I've lost the thread. What was the question?
Stop my clock.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Mr. Cooper.
I asked you, Mr. Wernick, before I was interrupted, that to clarify that you had, from the time that you had appeared at the Justice Committee, that you entirely removed yourself from discussions concerning the scope of the order in council and any further discussions or consideration of expanding the scope of that order in council.
That's correct. And everybody concerned was interviewed by the commissioner in the months that followed.
And to Ms. Damoff's point, it is of relevance to the issue of an RCMP investigation because we heard testimony from the RCMP that the central or strongest theory towards establishing obstruction of justice was whether the Prime Minister removed Jody Wilson-Raybould to get an Attorney General who would make a decision the Prime Minister wanted, and that the RCMP was impeded by their investigation to determine that as a result of the parameters of that order in Council. Mr. Wernick, when you appeared at the Justice Committee back in 2019, you characterized your interactions and those of the Prime Minister and his officials with the Minister of Justice, Jody Wilson-Raybould, as so-called lawful advocacy to appropriately raise public interest considerations to the minister, particularly that SNC would move its headquarters from Montreal, resulting in the loss of at least 9,000 jobs. I'm going to ask you, what evidence did the government have that SNC-Lavalin would move its headquarters from Montreal if a deferred prosecution agreement was not entered into?
I think we went over this at the Justice Committee. There were representations by SNC, and there were public statements made by SNC, and there were market disclosures by SNC.
Mr. Wernick, you must have known that SNC had a financing agreement with the Caisse de Depot that required it to maintain its headquarters in Montreal for another 6 years until 2024. It was public knowledge that SNC had entered a 20-year lease at its Montreal headquarters. It was also public knowledge that SNC had announced major renovations to its headquarters in Montreal worth millions. And 2 days before your infamous December 19, 2018 telephone call with Jody Wilson-Raybould, in which you specifically raised the issue of the 9,000 jobs and SNC moving its headquarters.
Hang on, Mr. Cooper. Go ahead with your point of order, Mr. Chahal, and I'll just advise you that it's been practice in this committee that I've given members their time to ask questions on a broad range of things in relation to this. If it's to object to the line of questioning to Mr. Cooper.
Mr. Chair, I haven't even made my point of order yet, so I'm not sure what you're objecting to.
Go ahead. I'm not objecting to anything. I want to hear what you have to say. Just hang on. Mr. Cooper, please.
My line of questioning.
Mr. Cooper is interrupting my point of order, which I have not had the opportunity to make.
Go ahead, Mr. Chahal. Go ahead. Go ahead.
So, Mr. Chair, I would like the opportunity to present my point of order. I'd asked Mr. Cooper the relevance of his questioning, and once again, you have not let me finish, Mr. Barrett. You're not the chair. Mr. Barrett, you're not the chair. If you let me finish,
Mr. Chahal, I know which direction you're going.
Well, you do not, because I haven't finished my sentence.
I do know which direction you're going on this.
All I would like to do is say the relevance to the point of order that Mr. Cooper on your questioning with the RCMP.
Line of questioning.
Hang on. Michael and Michael.
I presented my point of order.
I want Mr. Chahal. I want you to go through the chair on this. Okay, don't go through Mr. Cooper.
Thank you.
So you have a point of order that you're raising. State your point of order succinctly, please, and then we'll go from there.
So if I'm allowed to do so, I will raise my point of order succinctly. I'd like to know what the relevance of the questioning provided by Mr. Cooper is, because this has nothing to do with the RCMP.
Mr. Chahal, I've been chairing this committee now for 18 months, and in every circumstance that we've had discussions at this committee, I give members a broad latitude to discuss and ask questions that they feel are relevant to the situation, with the expectation that they're going to bring it back. So you're not issuing a point of order. Your point of order is actually very subjective. So, Mr. Cooper, you have the floor. Go ahead, please. You have 53 seconds. Thank you for your point of order, Mr. Chahal.
None other than 2 days before your infamous phone call with Jody Wilson-Raybould, in which you raised the issue of jobs at SNC moving, the CEO had publicly stated that SNC-Lavalin was committed to staying in Montreal. So why did you tell Jody Wilson-Raybould that jobs were on the line and there was a risk of SNC moving its headquarters when you had to have known that that simply wasn't true?
That was my understanding at the time, and that the law that Parliament created in terms of deferred
How is it
prosecution
possible?
agreements.
How is it possible that that
Now,
could have been your
could you let
understanding
me
at the
finish,
time in the
Mr.
face of
Cooper?
everything that I
Mr.
laid
Cooper,
out?
let him,
Will you let me-
let him finish,
Mr.
please.
Will you let me
Mr.
finish?
Wernick,
You're badgering.
your answer
you're
is
badgering.
simply
Point of
does not
order.
Mr.
have
Cooper.
Point of
validity.
order.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper, for your line of questioning. That concludes your time. We're going to now go to Mr. Baines for 5 minutes. Go ahead with your point of order, Mr. Chahal.
Once again, I just want to acknowledge the witness is here to answer the questions, not to be interrupted by the member asking the questions. So if you ask a question, allow the member, allow the witness to provide an answer. And it was, I'd ask Mr. Cooper to
Thank you. I get the
apologize
gist.
for rudely interrupting the witness in the middle of his questioning.
I get the gist of what you're saying, Mr. Chahal. We're going to proceed with Mr. Baines now for 5 minutes.